All right, welcome back, everyone. Scoop is here. We had a week and a half off. It's been great. That video that we first put out got plenty of love, so I appreciate you all for watching that one, and I hope you took plenty out of it. Today, we're going to be focusing on cash outs. Lockie, how's your week been, mate?
Pretty good. It's been cold. It started to get wet. Glad it wasn't too bad for the Maroons training session up at Warwick today, though. Got to go and have a squiz there. I've got a lot of respect for people who can actually tell what the heck is going on, because when there's a lot of dark-haired people the same height running around, it's hard to tell who's at what position.
Oh, God. What do you think of the nice thumbnail I just made too?
Yeah, it's good. Pretty hype. Oh, it was great fun because my brother also shares the same name as him, so it was quite funny interaction with the man, the myth, the legend, Cameron Smith.
Is he dad or no?
What, Cam Smith? No.
He's not dad? Okay, just checking.
No.
To be fair, you and your brother look like twins, almost.
Yeah, a little bit.
Is he younger?
Yes, he's younger. He just grows a better beard than me.
Yeah, fair. Well, you've seen mine, so there you go. All right. Let's get cranking in these cash outs. So we're going based on game day. So we got the Thursday night one tomorrow to kick us off. We have 4 games this week, guys, and generally a little bit around some strategy, Lockie, around cash outs and maybe how many you might want in your team heading into round 17. You want to start with that before we get into the players?
Yeah, the cash outs are a definite must in any fantasy season, but you can't go too heavy, otherwise your emergencies just aren't going to be useful in the back end of the season if big guns go down and you're out of trades. So it's probably good to have a couple. 1, 2, 3 is probably fine, but I wouldn't. Even 3 sort of heading towards pushing it. So you've got to really pick and choose which ones you go for, especially in this week and next, the really important ones for those cash outs.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I'm pushing to go for close to 3 cash outs, but I think the caveat to that is just making sure that you do have enough trades that you can, if there's an injury, a suspension, you can trade that guy out and make sure you have a strong 17 or 18 each week. That's probably the only thoughts around that. So if you do happen to have, just say you're making 3 trades this week and that leaves you with like 1 or 2 trades left with the 4 to come in 20, you might be running a little bit short to have that 3 strategy. The 3 is just optimal to have the best 17/18 that you can have each week. So obviously spending as much money on guns as you can. That's kind of the theory. If you have 2 though, probably a little bit safer, would you say?
Yeah, I'd say having a solid 18th man in your gun team, and even a 19th is good. Yeah. Like a gun 18th person who can score you a 50 from week to week, plus probably 2 220k or 240k guys is probably ideal, but a third one, if you've got a balanced team, is probably all right.
Okay, so if we went for that strategy then, if we had 2 cash outs, and then a few people asking about those guys in the mid-300s, around that 400k mark, the Brandon Smith's been thrown out, Isaiah Tass, which we are going to speak about. These types of guys, do you think they're maybe okay to have in there as someone that could hit maybe a 35 or 40 if you needed them to? Would you go with that?
I think at this stage of the fantasy season, there's not much place for them in your team unless they have a really massive upside in one area. For example, if they're going to make a good 200k and you need to trade them out for some money in emergency, but there's not going to be that many. Or if they're going to be in a particular position like Jack Bird, you could sort of argue him, especially with that 60 last week. But those guys who aren't really any particular top-level elite in any of those categories, you really don't want in your final team because you won't score them and they don't really serve a cash-out purpose.
Yeah, completely fair. And then unless there's like a Harry Grant when he moved to the Tigers a few years ago, that type of player that's going to score keeper-level scores, you really probably should steer clear of them. But in terms of that, we're going to start with that Sharks v Storm game, and we've got Kennedy here to speak of first. So a 278k with a break even of 3 there after his 37 or 38 on the weekend. We've got a little pros and cons list. Can you go through that with us, Lockie?
Yeah, Kennedy, when he's on, he can go well. He can score 30s and 40s. We saw plenty of that last year, and I think a little bit in 2020. This year, he came back to earth with a lot of teens and 20s and a couple of negative scores before he finally came good with that 42 and 36 last week. Having those 2 scores close together rather than a once off and then back to 20s makes me a lot more optimistic on him than I was last week. And given his break-even's low and he's still only 50k for base, if you're selling a lot of guys like Kohler, Savage, Kiraz, who are going to be your wing fullback cover, Kennedy could be your man when you lose all that backup. I don't mind him, actually. Just beware that he could be the type of person to go back to scoring 25 for the rest of the year, but that is a risk you have to take if you're going to jump on Kennedy.
That's fair. And I suppose the other thing to mention is these guys we're going to speak about if they're going to continue playing for the rest of the year or they become a red dot. So I suppose the important thing with Kennedy is we're looking for a good score this week, right? And then we're not too worried about it afterwards.
Yeah, pretty much. He's the fullback for the Sharks, so unless something goes drastically wrong or he gets injured, he'll be there for the rest of the year. He won't be able to be looped as a red dot, and having a 20-25 in your emergency isn't really a useful score you want to loop in anyway. So he becomes a lot less useful if he does go back to those scores, given that he won't be a looping option.
Yeah. I'd say my worry for his score this week, with that being the most important thing, is that Nico Hines is out. We should announce that as well, that Nico got COVID as of today, guys, and will be out for this week, and we'll have to see how it all works out for round 18. But everyone has him. It's not a big issue. Let's just put that out of the way. But in terms of the Sharks v Storm game, that means that the Storm should have a better chance of winning this game. Does that mean Kennedy has a higher chance of scoring lower? That's my worry with him in picking him up. And also just his price being $278, just a little bit above basement. You could spend a little bit less somewhere else. You may not need a wing fullback as well, so you could spend a little bit less, 220, 240 on guys we'll speak about later, and go for another option. That's my general thoughts. What do you reckon, Locke?
Yeah, if you're not going to sell all of those guys, there isn't as much need for Kennedy. With Hines being out, even though he's got those decent recent scores, it's a lot more of a risk to bring him in now for that round 17 score, because as you know, he went negative 2 weeks in a row. One was a send-off and one was just a terrible fantasy game. So without Hines, he falls in that bracket of more likely to score a 10 than he was before the news broke, sort of a thing.
Yeah. So it's almost, that extra 10 to 40 points that you've got there. Is it worth it, to spend that extra 58k, right? Could you just go to a 220 and even, almost cop the zero rather than, we obviously know how important every 50, 100k is. So that's Kennedy there. I know a lot of people picked him up last week as well, so hopefully he does score well for everyone, but he's personally someone I'm not going to pick. Are you in the same boat?
With that Hines news, I don't think I'll pick him now. We'll see whether I go for someone a bit cheaper or whether I trade out some of my wing fullbacks, because I do want either a Pappenhausen or a Latrell a bit later. Okay,
cool. I like that. I like those trades. A few people have been asking me about those too. I think they're both going to be great. Average that 50 or so. But Latrell's obviously, they're both actually obviously that 1 week back. So we'll see how that works out. Someone I'm a little bit more interested in, Chris Lewis at 265k, the break even at 12, which obviously doesn't matter too much. But I feel that he's someone who could personally score better in this week. What do you reckon, Loggy?
Yeah, I think so. With Kafusi not there and, the whole Origin contingent there, with a couple of injuries, meaning he's ahead in the pecking order. I think he played 80 minutes last week for 33, and although that's on the low side of the PPM, he's a little bit cheaper than Kennedy, and I feel like a 35 or a 40 this week will be a lot more valuable than a potential Kennedy, maybe 30 if you're sort of lucky, sort of a thing. I think he'll be more likely to be useful in the long run than Kennedy, because he might go back to being a red dot when Trent Loiero eventually returns or things like that. I think there's just more upside in general with those two areas that put him over Kennedy, unless you have that positional need.
Yeah, so 13k less. He's definitely someone that has scored better than that 33 as well in his 80-minute effort. So he has every chance of a 40, 45, 50. Scores you've seen from Ghana at times. Obviously, Seyfarth has played a couple of games that he played on the edge as well to get that 45, 50. So he's that type of player. He can plug a role for you, and anyone in 80 minutes can make on a good day 35 tackles and make 80 or 100 meters and get a 40 odd. So Lewis is in that bracket for me. So he's definitely someone I'm interested in, but obviously just a little bit more expensive than some of the guys we will speak about. And yeah, definitely right with the potential for a red dot over the next few weeks. And Grant Anderson. Again, a few guys have got this guy in their side at the moment. Just a few pros and cons on your side of the ball, Lockie.
Yeah, Grant Anderson was somebody who would have been ideal to snap up the instant he was named and when he was back at base price. However, the recent news that Raymond Smith re-injured his pec, poor bloke, during that recovery, he'll be out for the rest of the year. Yeah. George Jennings is also out because of the ACL, and Coates, there's just, the spot's his for a while, and he could sit there, just quietly churn away with a little bit of coin and be a decent backup. He might even get winger duel, given I think the final batch of updates is in the next couple of rounds, so that might be useful, right? But I think it's after round 18, yes. So if he stays at wing, he should get sent to wing fullback duel. However, that 17 and the 8 in the last couple of weeks when he didn't score tries is really worrying. So when he's 50k above base price and not wing fullback at the current moment, I'm kind of a little bit cold on Grant Anderson. He's there, but I prefer other options.
Yeah, I agree. Let's move on to the next game. We've got Knights v the Rabbitohs, and Isaiah Tass is in there at 346k. He does have a few more better scores out of him than some of the guys we just spoke about. A break even of 7, and potentially may fit into that role that I was just talking about, the Brandon Smith, the Tass, that awkward price, that if you could, if you need him as a cover for a certain position, obviously the centre position there, and he's someone that could score you somewhere in the 30s on a regular basis, potentially. That's probably the only reason I would look to pick him up as a cash out or slight cash cow this week. Or if you had a lot of trades, like a 10 plus trades kind of number. Lockie, thoughts?
Yeah, Campbell Graham's cheekbone fracture, basically consolidated. Tass is going to stay there for a good while anyway, even though he was put ahead of Milne. He's the most expensive one on this list, but because he can do pretty well and get those reasonably good scores at centre, even without tries, he does fall into that category of a good backup and not a really useless 15, 20 points like some of the other guys can potentially be after the Origin stars come back. He did get a 17 or something like that the other week or a couple of weeks ago when he played the Broncos. Yeah, before he got dropped the first time. Yeah. So that should sort of dampen your enthusiasm. Don't expect an instant keeper. Don't expect Talakai, second coming of Talakai or anything like that. But I do quite like him as a backup to, say, an Aitken and a Burton, or an Aitken and a Manu or something like that as your third centre that sort of sits in your 19th position for the rest of the year.
Just gave me some terrible memories at 15. I brought him in the head-to-head squad for that and played him for that 15. So, and he's been great every game other than that. So, I think we've covered him perfectly. Someone we are both very interested in is Mr. Jed Cartwright, who's playing on the edge for the Bunnies and looks like probably just get the 1 week. So, I'm personally interested. 240k. There's one of two guys that are 240 or less in this group. And anyone playing on the edge, you're looking for somewhere between that 40 to 50 minutes at a minimum. If things go right or for him in the game, if there's some injuries or something happens, and he could potentially play 80 and get a decent score. But you'd expect anything above a 25-30 at a minimum for him, is my general thoughts. What do you reckon, Mr. Scoop?
Yeah, I quite like him. His historical PPM does worry me a little bit, but given he's a sort of a 1 week wonder with so many players out, I think he could do sort of the arrow roll, go for like 60, 65 minutes before coming off for somebody else in the last, and that would turn him into something like a 35 or potentially a 40, which makes him a pretty good round 17 score before he turns into a looper.
Yeah, as you said there, like in the con section, the PPM hasn't been terrific, but we're taking what we can get. For someone that's 240, you can spend that money elsewhere. If you are trading guys like Carrazza, there's 250k in the bank that you can use to upgrade, whether it's this week or whether it's next week. Actually, I want to ask you a question about that. This week, there's, we've kind of, a lot of us have picked up the sort of the 5 to 6 to 7 guns that are available. Obviously, all the Eels guys that I'm not happy with at the moment. But those guys, the McInneses, these types, and a couple of Knights players potentially, or an offhand Galway, right? We have those types of guys. So there's probably 1 or 2 you could potentially pick up this week. But a lot of the guns we want are going to be in Origin, right? We got the Cam Murrays, the Damien Cooks, these types of players that we're wanting to get. Do you think it's worth banking some cash this week, getting a couple of cash outs in, so trading Carraz to a Jed Cartwright, banking the 250, and maybe doing that with someone else, a Savage down to get an extra 150 or something like that, and leaving that money in the bank ready to go for around 18 and 19 upgrades? What do you reckon about that?
Yeah, I quite like that strategy, because if you bank up, say, 400k and have 2 cash out scores for, say, combined 60, 70 points, that's only, you lose maybe 40, 50 points in round 17, and then potentially save quite a lot for somebody like if you haven't got a Madison or an IPAP or think something like that, when they're going to be a lot cheaper next week, and you can then buy that Murray and not worry about the Origin scores and things like that. I really, really like Murray and IPAP now that he's back at second row. I think that wet weather game is probably an anomaly, although it was really bad for anybody who did own him. It's not going to be ideal for your round 17 score, but given it'll save you some salary cap and probably enable you to do more, I quite like the strategy of going a couple of cash outs to gun up harder in round 18 and 19.
So would you potentially not trade in a Madison or a Papali'i this week and trade them in next week? Is that what you're saying? Or would you just bypass them altogether and go to a Murray instead?
I think what's going to happen is I'm going to pass on those two this week and see how they score this in round 17. If they score well, I'll decide whether I want which of the couple I want between them and Murray in round 18, and that gives me a little bit clearer decision of who I want. Murray obviously is the top gun, but if IPAP's suddenly going to go back to scoring 60, 65 he's got a massive break even like 90 this week, and he'll go below probably 775, 750. He'll be cheaper than Murray and score nearly as well if he goes back to that role now that he's on the edge. So I potentially want to have a look at what he's going to do this week before I make that final decision.
Yeah, cool. So you're more looking towards your final team rather than just thinking about round 17 in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Because he's still got, 9 rounds? Something like that. Left, which makes sense. You're looking to get the best scores possible. And if they're not going to go back, if Paps is going to spend a bit of time at 13, and he's probably not going to go back to those 60 scores, is he? So, yeah, I can understand that as a good strategy as well. Good for that. Cheers for that. All right, we got Davi Moale, we got Daniel Saluka Fafita as well. Both at 220k. And the question is Fafita going to play? I believe he's in the 18th man at the moment.
Yeah, he's just signed back to Souths from the Roosters, and one of the two will play. Moale's 17, Saluka Fafita's 18. Whoever plays will get you some round 17 points before becoming a nothing for the run home at a loop. At absolute base price, you can squeeze the most cash out of them, but given Moale's role this year and how many people he's stuck in, I really don't think they're a great option. If you want 20 points and a cash out and you can't do it any other way, maybe, but they're on the lower end of this list, in my opinion.
Imagine Fafita gets picked over Davi for those that have had Davi for like 8 rounds or something. That'd be tough. Good chance though, because he's been playing some okay minutes for the Roosters, so I think it's a nice pickup for them. But yeah, interesting one there. I definitely think I'd probably spend the extra 20 personally and go for a Jed. And there's one other guy we'll speak about in the last game as well. All right, we'll go to Tigers v the Eels, and we got Fa'amanu Brown at 327k. Obviously has a dual position. What are your thoughts on him, mate?
I just love his story. He had to come back after I think 3 ACL injuries and not playing rugby league for ages. He's been working into some decent minutes. I just was a little sad that his price has gone up so much because of those 2 tries in his first game. It's really pushed his price up to, well, as you can see, well over 300k now. Little was dropped for him the other week, but he's back on the bench this week. And although he scored well there last week in the past, it hasn't been amazing. I think if he still gets that 40, 45 minutes instead of like 50 minutes, he could still do it all right. But that's the thing. He might do all right. He might be attacked, but a lot less likely. So he's probably not going to be on my watch list, but he's something that I had to bring up because a lot of people have been talking about him as of late.
Yeah, for sure. Minutes, you'd say around that 40, 45?
with Little on the bench this week, I'd say it won't be any more than last week. So I'd be expecting somewhere like that 46 or a little bit less.
As you said, a little bit scary and a bit too much. I mean, he's not going to make a shitload of money. So that's that. We got Justin Matamua at 220k on the edge. He's playing off the bench, correct?
Yeah, he's off the bench. The thing with him is that he's quite highly rated at the Tigers, and because he's an edge, Twile and co won't really affect him as much. But bench edges are pretty much the worst scoring position in the game, so you really want him to crack on and get half the game before you get a good score out of him. So he's an option, but I don't think he's probably the best one. I think his partner in crime on the bench for Noah Poll for not that much more and close to 240k is probably more your go.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. The one before with Tuolangi's role a bunch of weeks ago. At best, you're looking at that 25 on an edge or something like that. So, yeah, I'm very interested in Whanua. Obviously, played the 43 minutes last week and made 37 tackles and I think 60 metres through the middle there. So he was going great guns. And at 249k, if you can get anywhere near that output this week, in a team where nothing too much has changed, obviously, we've got Musgrove, we've got Utokamanu on the bench. Offengawa is playing big minutes, and the outlook on their bench with Little and also who was the other fella that's not a middle?
Mata, we were just talking about, I think.
Okay, cool.
Or the other bloke.
I feel like there was only two middles on the bench there. That's all, or two.
Anywho. Yeah, let me have a quick look. Bench is Utokamanu, Matamua, Little, and Pop. So, yeah.
Okay, cool. But yeah, there should definitely be some minutes available. What do you think of him?
I actually quite like him. He's probably just about going to be one of the couple that I'm going to bring in this week as my cash down. I was really surprised they straight away gave him more minutes than those couple who had been in the team for most of the year.
Yeah.
Or barring injury. So I'm really interested to see how he scores and how many minutes he gets going forward, because while Twile's out, we still haven't got any news on a timeline or a return for Twile. So it looks like those long-term rumours might actually be turning out to be true. And if that's the case, he could be an absolute great option, a great buy who gets some solid sort of 30s, 35s from the bench in your emergencies and sort of turn into that TAS role, not really as a position as a backup, but more as a cash out who's a little bit cheaper and will still score you quite well in an emergency.
Cool. And if you have a lot of trades, potentially makes enough that you could use that cash, maybe.
Yeah.
In like around 22 or something like that.
Yeah, if he scores those sort of the 30, 35, I don't think he'll keep scoring 40s. If he does, it's going to be insane. He'll be the cash cow of the year at the back end for almost. But yeah, if he gets those sort of 30, 35s and semi-decent minutes, he could get up to a couple 100k more than he is now and be like your final cash out trade to a gun sort of a thing.
Yeah, perfect. I see that as well. And we got Kai Rodwell also at 220k, which is one of those cheap guys that we're interested in. Tell me a little bit more about Kai.
I wouldn't really have looked at him except for the fact I heard a couple of weeks ago Nathan Brown had been told he could walk and go to another club. So it looks like they're looking to Kai Rodwell in the future. I think in round 15 he played 3 minutes, and last week he played 28 minutes. The Eels don't really have like a heap of guys playing Origin. I mean, Polo obviously is there, but he was on the bench last week and got 28 minutes when they were all available. So I quite like him as an option. I think I would rate Pol slightly higher than him, but he is at that absolute base price. So it'll be interesting to see how he goes, actually.
Yeah, because Madison will be back in and Bolo will be out. So it really doesn't change too much, you'd say, both middles. Cool with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, sweet.
If both of them come back in and push him out, well, then he just becomes a red dot. But for this week, he could be an interesting scorer, maybe get you a 30, similar to what he did last week.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. That 28 minutes seems fair. Okay, we have a couple to go. Broncos v Drags. We've got Palacia, who I brought into my team last week, just knowing that he would definitely be there this week. Thankfully for me, and for anyone who's looking to pick him up, he does get the starting role. So hopefully as many minutes as he did last week, and hopefully a better score. Thoughts?
Yeah, it's a lot easier to project Palacia than some of the other guys. He's been in the starting team and then on the bench for most of the year, so you can project and kind of guess what he's going to do quite easily with Haas out. Haas, I think, is predicted to be out another 2 weeks. And if you have 240s in round 17 and then an Origin and backup affected round 18, that could really help before he sort of just sits on the bench for the rest of the year. It's a little bit sad that he won't be a red dot, probably because he's been on that bench scoring 15 to 20 minutes for most of the year. But with those potential 240 scores in those in the last set of Origin affected rounds, he could be a really sneaky buy, especially with that duel.
Yeah, the duel as well. Another thing to mention, if we are going for at least 2 or potentially 3 cash outs, just remember, if you probably want 1 or 2 of them to be a red dot, and the other one probably won't matter too much. Just, you want at least 1 there so you can loop. If you have everyone as a green dot, then that would probably be a slight issue. But if you do have 1 or 2 guys that are still playing, it's not going to be a massive issue there. And if you're running lower on trades, at worst, they're there for that emergency. Even if it's a 15 or 20 and there's a laid out, you do get that 15 or 20 rather than getting a 0 if you're trying to hold trades. So it's something.
Yeah.
But yeah, we move on to a very interesting one for me anyway. The cheapest of the bunch and potentially could get the highest score, I believe, in Zach Hosking. Tell me a little bit more.
Zach Hosking, he's a little bit like Jed Cartwright, except 20k cheaper, starting edge in a team with a lot of players out. He'll almost certainly go back to reserve grade and be a looper for around 18, 19 onwards. It's not as certain what he's going to score, but when you've got a starting edge, you'd probably want to be expecting those 50, 60 minutes at least. And if he plays 80 minutes and scores you 45, you're laughing. So I think Zach Hosking is quite a good option if you're looking for a cash out.
Yeah. And if we look at edges and young fellas that have come in for the Broncos, they've actually usually played pretty big minutes on, in their first few games. We've seen TC Rabadi play some good time in an 80-minute role or close to it on an edge, for example. So there's every chance that can happen. And at worst, you'd expect around a 50-minute outing for him and hopefully a decent score. Middles and edges for the Broncos tend to score fairly well on a general basis, general thought there. So I think Hosking is probably going to be close to my first pick as a cash out this week. I think my team, I'm going to try and get 2 of them in. So Hosking will be 1. Did you have an idea of which one you'd go for? 10 minutes left.
I think what's going to happen is I'm going to pick one that's going to play for the rest of the year and sort of score that 15 to 20, and one that doesn't. So I'm going to pick one of Hosking and Jed Cartwright and one of Paul Rodwell, and I think there's another bloke I mentioned earlier. So
Chris Lewis I mentioned as well. So Paul Lewis and then
Lewis
as well. Yeah, probably the 3 I'm looking at personally.
Those 3 who are going to sit on the bench once people return, and those 2 who are going to go straight to being red dot loopers. I think I'm going to get one of each of those. I'm just not sure which way I'm going to swing yet. But I think that's my plan. I think I'm going to skip Kennedy, Grant Anderson, and Tass. I really would like Tass, but he just doesn't have a place in my team at the moment when I'm struggling to sort of get that maximum salary cap out of my final team.
Yeah, perfect. I like that. Okay, and then in terms of potential options for this week, just quickly back into the guns, just to refresh. We talk about the hookers and really not anyone to pick. I don't believe in the hooking position this week. Not really much to talk about. In terms of the mids, we've obviously got a few guys like Offengawe's probably moved into this list. What are your thoughts on him, just quickly?
Yeah, I'd say with Twile out for a while, he'll keep those high minutes. I mean, he'll still score you 45 sometimes, but as you can see from last week, he can also go big when you want him to. I think he'll be that solid mid-level keeper rather than a borderline 51, 52, 53 average now. Yeah. So as somebody that's a little bit cheaper than an IPAP or a Murray for 100k less, if he can score you 55, 56 for the rest of the year, I think that's pretty good, especially as a round 17 scorer.
Yeah, I agree with that one. So definitely a solid pick if you want to go with him. We're thinking Adam Elliott now is probably a keeper. We're worried about his minutes a little bit off the bench.
I was so scared when I saw on the bench, but he was fine. He was all good. It was same old story. I think Elliott is a keeper now, unless Ricky decides to do any more shenanigans. But
He wasn't on for 30 minutes.
They didn't happen last week, even though he tried.
And Tarpany's been incredible, so he's definitely a keeper this year. He's stepped up his game for sure. And then Clemmer's just going to be a solid one. I'd probably select Offengawe over Clemmer right now, just a little bit cheaper, for example. And then on our edge, obviously Madison's probably our clear best buy this week. I'm glad he had that week off just to get right, and he should go back to scoring super well. But just remember, he was playing like a ridiculous level of football, so there is a small chance that he is at his peak price right now, and he could drop a little bit to about a 750. Would you agree with that? If he doesn't, he's been six offloads a game and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, with him also starting lock now rather than coming on with tired forwards off the bench for the rest of the game, there is a chance he could drop just a little.
Smart.
But yeah, with that week off, I think he'll be primed to just keep churning out those good scores. Whether it's 60 plus rather than high 50s, who knows? But with some of the other guns like Papali'i falling a lot in recent weeks, I think you kind of have to pick. It's hard to say whether you have to pick Madison over him now that Papali'i's back at edge, but I would really like to pick up Madison.
Okay. Yeah. He's fun to watch. They're both fun to watch, especially when Papali'i's on an edge, that's for sure. Not fun if you haven't owned him for the whole season and pick him up and he averages 43 or something. Good times. I'm not salty at all, I swear. What do we got here? Dylan Brown. I own him. I'm slightly off him. Just like people thinking about him as a buy. I don't think he is. He's way less consistent than last year, which is strange.
Yeah, he started off really hot, and then like the Eels went hot, cold, hot, cold. He got that. If he hadn't got that 81 the other week, I think we all would have sold him ages ago. He's churned out so many 30s and 40s recently.
Painful. Just weird. Like last year, it'd be like a 45, 55, 50, 60. He'd be in that 15 range, whereas this year it's like 80, 38, 80, 38, 38, 38. That's crazy.
TPJ in the halves.
What's that, sorry?
It's like watching TPJ, but in the halves.
Oh, God, yeah. If we're looking at this one, I'm seeing DCE standing out so clearly to me. Cleary, DCE, Nico Hines, it's like your top three. And then see what happens with Munster when he comes back. Other than that, if you have Hughes, obviously still a solid option, but if you can try and get away with not bringing him in this week, he just hasn't got it this year. And the Storm aren't playing as well either. So that's the biggest one. If Storm were playing a lot better, I think Hughes we just pick straight away. I picked him up last week. I went with it just because my team isn't sitting as pretty, and I went for that little bit cheaper guy. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get to a DCE, for example. So, yeah, if you need to spend a little bit less, then he could be all right. But other than that, not ideal. Yep. In terms of pickups in the centres this week, not many, if we're being honest. We're selling guys more than picking them up. But
Campbell Graham's injury really puts a dampener on gun round 17 centres. So.
Yeah, Burton, Aiken, Manu, that's probably about it. And then wing fullbacks. So the Garrick news is a little bit interesting. I hope someone is subscribed to General Physio and hear what he was saying about that. It's something that maybe could linger, but hopefully with the week off he'll be okay because we'd like him to be in there. Drinkwater's been great, so I think we definitely have a clear top five, and then we can throw Latrell Mitchell in there as well, and he's the only one that you could pick up this week that's going to be playing. So if you think, again, if you got a little bit less in your bank and you want to spend up on Latrell like you're potentially thinking about, then I think he's the solid one. But any of those six are going to be decent. What are your thoughts around Latrell? You mentioned him or Pap this week. Just a little final touch on this video with those two.
If Pappenhausen had got 50 in a nice, gentle, consistent scoring, I would probably not even be looking at Latrell too much because Pappenhausen's the top gun. But he was on like 8 or something with like 10 minutes to go and then got the most ridiculous score of junk points I've ever seen. Manly tried so hard to turn that into the worst choke of all time and they didn't quite succeed. And Pap managed to get out of 50 and he's still pretty much the price he was on this list when I made it the other week. So that's the only reason why I'm looking at Latrell Mitchell as well, because I'm not sure if I trust Pappenhausen to score really well this week, given that he kind of did nothing until that final bit, whether he was just told to hold off on the first week back and that last 10 minutes was him setting sail and unleashing, or whether that was because he's still a bit unfit and out of form. It's hard to say really. So you're going a bit of risk either way, and when you've got risk either way and Lachel's 200k cheaper, it looks really, really appealing all of a sudden.
Yeah, I agree with that. And just to finish off, I believe I just realised that in doing my recording here, I think I've left my normal picture of me in the corner on. So hopefully it's just covering my head and not yours. We'll see how that goes. Well, that was awesome, mate. I even if we can't see us, the information was incredible, and I hope that helped everyone out a lot. And please get in there, get in the comments, give the Scoop Man, Mr. Lockie Smith, some love. I definitely appreciate you being here, mate. And this Word doc was all you again, so I appreciate that. Any final words, mate?
I might have been left with egg on my face at the end of the last video. Queensland sweep and Blues absolutely smashed us. That was good fun. I'm keen for Game 3, especially after going to see the Maroons training camp today. Have a good round 17, everybody. Good luck with your picks.
Any scoop from training?
It's so hard. It's my first time trying to have a go at it, and I could tell you Munster wasn't there. But, yeah, other than, oh, yes, Cobbo's right wing still. Yes, I can see DCE kicking the ball. That's expected. I didn't really get a lot of real insight. So no Munster, but I mean he's coming off that injury. So like I think it should be a week out, pretty much as advertised so far.
Yeah, he'll get back for it. He'll be fine. All right. Well, thank you for that, legend. I hope you guys all enjoyed this video. Please like, subscribe, get in there, have some fun, and enjoy this video and set up that team for round 17. I hope you can get somewhere around that 10 people playing and have a good week. We'll see you in the Discord, guys. Ciao.